Hello, and thank you for joining us on the What Do New Teachers Need to Know podcast from the Art of Education University. My name is Tim Bogatz, and together with Janet Taylor, we have put together a series of 8 episodes directed at new teachers that share some of our best advice on a variety of topics. Some of the discussions you will hear over the course of these episodes originally appeared on the Art Ed Radio podcast, and some are new to this podcast. Sometimes we'll be answering listener questions, sometimes we'll be giving advice, and sometimes we will simply be having a discussion that shares some of our favorite strategies and advice. No matter the case, we hope that listening will be helpful for you. Today, we are going to talk about assessment, what new teachers need to know about assessment. It's something that can make a lot of teachers' eyes kind of glaze over when you talk about it. But in all honesty, knowing about assessment and how to effectively use assessments can do so much for your teaching and for your students' learning. I'm always glad to talk to Janet, but on this topic and in this episode especially, it's going to be great. She is genuinely excited when it comes to assessment, and she has so much to share. Let's get into it. Janet Taylor joining me now. Janet, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you, Tim?
I am also doing well. I'm excited to tap into your expertise about assessment. I think you know more about assessment than anyone I know, so I'm very excited about this because, very few people are actually super passionate about assessment. But would you put yourself in that category? Would you say you're passionate about assessment?
Yeah, I definitely always say it's really geeky, right? That I love assessment so much. And I always joke too, right? It's not like I woke up one day and was like, I cannot wait to write some rubrics, right?
Right,
That
right.
is not where it came from. So yeah, I get excited to talk about it because I feel like it's so much more than what we think it is, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, there are layers to it, and we'll
Yeah.
we'll dive into all of that today. But yeah, like I said, you know a lot. You've written a lot about this, and I'm hoping that you can guide all of our new teachers through some of the ins and outs. I'll throw a few things in here and there, but we'll rely on you a lot today. So let's start with, I guess, just some really basic stuff for everybody who's starting out, or everybody who's just starting to care about assessment. So basic question, what is the difference between formative and summative assessments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that this is an area that when you're a new teacher is probably one of the most confusing parts.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just kind of maybe simplify it for everybody, right?
Yes, please do.
So formative assessment is like the day-to-day, moment-to-moment feedback that you're getting with your students to help them get to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the summative is demonstrating what students know and can do. It's still feedback, and you can use it for a lot of different ways, and we can talk about more about that. But those two things are very important. So formative is getting you to where you need to go. Summative is showing what you can do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a very simple explanation. And yeah, I love the idea of, formative is just that day-to-day stuff, those conversations you have, just making small tweaks, small pieces of feedback, things like that. And then summative is sort of the end goal. And I think that
Right.
that works. Okay, so basic question number 2, just kind of looking at the big picture, like, what is assessment,
Mm-hmm.
okay, overall, and how do we differentiate between assessment and grading?
Yeah. That is also an excellent question because really there's so much to unpack when it comes to assessment. But again, in its simplest terms, assessment is feedback. That's all.
Hmm.
It is feedback for the students, it is feedback for you. Grading is the thing that we all dread. And I think that's where everybody says, "Ooh, assessment. I hate assessment." And it's no, no, no. I think you really just hate
You hate
grading.
grading, and we need to not conflate the two. Like, we need to
Correct.
keep that separate. Like,
Yeah.
assessment is the feedback that should be happening very consistently, and grading are all the little numbers that go in your
Yeah.
grade book.
Yeah, I mean, truly, it's the assigning of those letters, numbers, percentages, any of that stuff that goes towards student skills, concepts, and behaviors, right? Now, you
Hmm.
can assess student skills, concepts, and behaviors, give
Yes.
feedback, and help
Yes.
them get to where they need to go without putting a grade in, or even if you do, those two things should still be in your mind separate, right?
Yes.
And one of the biggest pieces I want to make sure that people think about when they think about grading is that grading is also arbitrary, it's
Hmm.
inaccurate, and it is highly inequitable. And I can go in about all of those things, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that feels like topics for another
Yeah,
podcast,
yeah, we
but
could definitely. I wrote an article about that, so if you were looking for that, you can kind of access that. But
hmm.
but here's the thing: grading is still that system, unfortunately, that we work within. And then there are ways to, again, to make your grading practices more equitable. But that, like you said, is a better topic. I might touch on some of those today because it's really hard not to talk about that, right?
No, no, please do, because I think that's something that everybody needs to think about when they are grading, when they're setting up their grade books, their rubrics, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, like you said,
Yeah,
we'll kind of get into that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay, so I want to talk a little bit about assessment, and I feel like this is something that you and I keep repeating in all of these new teacher podcasts, is that it takes a while to get it right.
Yeah.
And I would say for me, like it took me probably a decade to actually realize how to be effective with assessment. I'm not saying I was a complete failure, but I got things right here and there. Like I feel like I did a lot of things right, but it took me a long time to really feel like I was able to tie it all together,
Hmm.
have like an overarching plan for how everything was going to work. So I guess for you, like, how long did it take you to realize that assessment goes way beyond like just grades?
Yeah. So same here. I mean, it took me, I'm guessing, a solid 8 years for me. And that was
Hmm.
as I was digging into my teaching practice and trying to ask some really big questions about what was going on in my classroom, right? I was thinking
Yeah.
about, why were my students saying things like, will this get me an A? Or am I done
Hmm.
yet? Or is this good
Hmm.
enough? And I thought,
Yes.
okay, that's a problem for me because I'm all about learning for learning's sake, right? Authentic learning
Right.
and
Right.
connections. So I guess digging deep into those questions, and then how am I actually working through my curriculum, and how am I scaffolding things in a certain way to get my students to use their critical thinking skills, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is when I started to think, okay, what am I doing that is not supporting that? Right. And
Hmm.
that's when I kind of got into assessment. And it's funny, I just spoke at our local conference, our state conference, about
Yeah.
sneaky assessment, right?
Okay.
Like creative assessment, ways to engage creativity through assessment. And I said also known as, right, sneaky assessment in the art room.
That's a
Because
great name. I love
yeah.
that.
Because what it really came down to is I was talking about it. I was talking a lot about curriculum scaffolding. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times people look at all of that and they're like, yeah, I'm doing all of that. And we're like, right, those are the assessments, and so thinking about where your students are going and kind of working backwards and think, how am I actually supporting them? Those are the assessments, right? Because every little piece that you're kind of scaffolding up to it, you're thinking about, how are my students doing with that, right? Do they
Right.
need more
Right.
help? Do they need more extensions? Do they have it already before I even started? Those kinds of things. And that informs your decisions with your curriculum, right? So
Yes.
that,
Exactly.
yeah, so that's the part. It took me so long. I used to think, I mean, as I think most of us, right, that it was like, here's my lesson, right? I'm going through my
Hmm.
unit. I want
Hmm.
my students to get to this point, and then how am I inserting, exit ticket, bell ringer, right?
Right.
How am I putting a rubric together at the end, right? And
Hmm.
those were the parts that I realized assessment is not an add-on, right? It's
Yes.
should be integrated organically throughout to inform
Hmm.
where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying. And I said it took me forever to figure out how to make it a comprehensive piece, how to make it whole. And yeah, because it always was just something that you tacked on at the end, or like, oh yeah, I'm told that I should do this. Where can I fit it in? But like you said,
Right.
the end goal is to make it be a part of everything that you do.
Right.
And
And I would say on that same front, like if you wait until the end, right? Like you have this
Mhm.
project and then, or artwork or whatever you're doing, unit, and you create a rubric for that. You're like, okay, this is what I want my students to come out with, right?
Mhm.
And what I noticed, right, is that I was either spending 1,000 hours grading, this student work,
Yeah,
and maybe my students who were getting an A on the rubric really were kind of doing mediocre work, right?
yeah,
Or students who were doing incredible work weren't hitting the specific criteria on my rubric, right?
yep,
And so something was not working, and I realized two things were happening, right? It was, my assessment tool is not accurately measuring what I'm teaching, or most commonly both things, both, not just an and or, right? It's usually both. um, I didn't set them up along the way so that they knew that those were the pieces that I wanted to make sure they were getting
yes,
at the end. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are conversations that you should be having throughout.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. So, okay, I want to shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about just some of the like very basic logistics. I think it's good for new teachers to talk about the logistics of grading because it can be so overwhelming. Just like, what do I grade? When do I grade it? How do I organize it? So let's just start right now with like how you set up your grade book, because I think things can be different for everybody, as far as how you grade, how many points things are worth, like what your district or your school is going to require of you when you're setting up gradebooks. So,
Mhm.
I guess Jennifer, like, what advice would you have for people as far as like what they should think about when they're setting up their gradebook?
Right. So starting out, I would say keeping it as simple and clean as possible. And what I
Hmm.
mean by that, first of all, you have to, like you said, Tim, everybody's setup is a little different based on your school, your administration, the expectations, right? So some schools will say formative must be no more than 40% of the total grade, or
Yeah.
you can only do 10% of homework, or whatever it is, which, by the way, that's one way I get rid make my grading equitable, is I do not
Yes.
have homework and grade
Yeah.
that. But okay. So you have to look at those parameters first. But the cleanest way that has worked for me, and it may not work for everybody, there are two options usually. One is grading by total points and grading like weighted categories, right?
Hmm.
And I'll tell you what, like figuring out all that math and the percentages and the weight category, it just, my brain cannot handle all of that, right? So
Yeah.
I usually say, okay, formative is worth, X percentage, summative is worth another percentage, and then I have like a final exam grade, right?
Hmm.
And that's the total weighting that I do. But then within my grade book, everything is out of points, and I make it add up to total points. So, for example, I might have like formative work that I'm actually grading.
Yeah.
I think we'll talk about that, right?
Well,
Um,
that's another thing we need to
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
today, but go ahead.
So, formative that I might actually grade might be 5 points, might be 10 points, might be, 20 points. I usually don't go even more than 20 points. Does it matter? No, because it's all out of total points anyway for that
Hmm.
weighting, for
Hmm.
the formative weight, right? Which might be, let's say, 20% or something like that, let's just say. And then summative, I always do it out of 100 points, or depending on what it is. So like a summative artwork, like a students have been working a couple weeks on this artwork, then that's 100 points, right? Because they're demonstrating what they know. Again, within that, it doesn't matter because it's within that category, right?
Yes.
But I might do something like smaller summative work, right? So maybe they're practicing some things, but they're still demonstrating. It's still more than formative. And so
Hmm.
maybe I'll give that, 50 points of a summative artwork or something like that. And
Yeah.
so that way I'm in control of kind of how things are weighted within the category, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the category weights
I was
kind
going to
of.
say your grade book can still be 70-30 or whatever.
Exactly. Right.
Yep.
And right, exactly. And to me, I know it sounds like, as I'm explaining this on a podcast, it sounds like, what are you talking about, right? But truly keeping things total points, I think, is the easiest way and
Yeah.
simplest way to go.
And yeah, let your grade book do the math after that.
Exactly.
Yep. So, okay. I know I see a lot of questions, get a lot of questions about how many things should I be grading? Like, how many grades should I put in per week? How many grades do I have every quarter? And I don't know, Janet, how would you answer that one?
Yeah. So again, that is very specific to your school. When I was teaching, I'm trying to remember, maybe it was Chicago Public Schools, they were, adamant to hold kids very accountable and make sure you could
Mm-hmm.
see the grades in the grade book, and parents could see that, right? They required 3 grades per week, which I was like, what? How are we going to do
That's
this?
tough
Right?
to do in art class.
It is. It's really tough. And so what does that actually look like? I mean, that we can talk more about. But I think personally, it's more important to kind of have a consistent part of your grading process and getting those grades in timely, because
Mm-hmm.
there's no point of putting a grade in, especially for a formative, right? There's no point if you're going to grade that. There's no point in waiting 2 weeks to grade that or put that
Yes.
in. Then there's no feedback coming back to the student, right? And they can't
Mm-hmm.
fix it for next time. So I
Mm-hmm.
think those that's a big piece. And I'll tell you again, this took me years to get to a point where I finally feel really good about my grading practices, right?
Yeah, no,
But I think that
I
makes sense.
was the same way. Like it
Yeah.
is very difficult to find the time to grade what you need to grade, but I
Mhm.
would say you need to make it a priority because I had a lot of times, this is just one example of, I guess, the consequences of that. I would wait a couple weeks to grade everything, and then I'd put in like 5 grades at once with,
Yes.
like sketchbook, practice work, assignment, like whatever else I was grading. And then all of a sudden, kids who can access their grades at any time are seeing these huge fluctuations in their grade.
Yes.
They go from a C minus to an A or a B down to a D because they didn't
Hmm.
turn something in. And, it would be no feedback, no feedback, no feedback. All of a sudden you have a D. Like that's very
Hmm.
stressful to them. And that's not really fair to them to make them ride that roller coaster. And
Yeah.
same thing for parents. That can be, a lot of anxiety where you're not seeing any grades for weeks and weeks at a time. And then all of a sudden, the grade just drops
Yeah.
huge. And
And then the student looks at it and they're like, wait, what was that? When
yeah,
did we
yeah,
do that?
exactly.
And
Like
then look
I
back
don't
at
even
it.
remember that from 2.5 weeks
Right.
ago. And so yeah, I would just say, it needs to be a priority for you. Maybe not the top priority, but at least
Hmm.
make sure then that you're doing it consistently.
Yeah, so kind of jumping on that, though, I will say again the difference between grading and assessment, right? So
Hmm.
remember, assessment is the feedback. So all the stuff that you're giving feedback on, whether that's in the grade book or comments on a handout or final scores
Hmm.
on an artwork or whatever it is, needs to be timely. So, that truly for me has become what I am focused on. And it helps me decide what I'm going to grade and not grade,
Yeah.
right? And makes me focus on, okay, did I give them the feedback? What's most important? Is it the feedback or the grade at this point,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Well, and I want to get to that point, but I have one more. We're kind of in a speed round question here.
Mhm.
But what about completion grades? Okay, how do you feel about completion grades?
Yeah, I definitely, I definitely do this.
Okay, okay.
Um, yeah, so this happens when, for example, I have to put a grade in. Like I said, if I
Hmm.
have 3 in a week, maybe I'm just checking off to say, hey, the kid did this. And
Yeah.
maybe that's the culture of like the students, the parents'
Hmm.
expectations, that kind of thing. Or I really want students to focus on the learning in a low risk
Yes.
way.
Yep.
And I don't really need to worry about, I don't need to ding them or penalize them on a grade, right? Because
Hmm.
they're still learning it. And so I just want to make sure that at least they've done the work for it. So then I
Yep.
can work on fixing that for the next assignment or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's a good way to get kids to experiment and to try some new things, because a lot of times you'll break out a new technique or, get out a new material, and kids are very anxious about that, very
Mm-hmm.
apprehensive, like, what if I'm not good at this? And,
Yeah.
like that's a good way to just say, I don't care if you're good at it, like just try it.
Yeah.
Like I just want you to give this a try. I just want you to experiment with this, and as long as you do it, like full points. Like I think that's an easy way to sort of take some of the anxiety off of those kids and just make sure that they're trying the new things that you want them to try.
And that's a really good point, because a lot of times too they'll be like, oh, am I going to get points off because I didn't do X, Y, and Z, or couldn't do X, Y,
Right,
and Z?
right.
I had that happen just the other day. They're like, I am struggling with this technique that's kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it's okay that you didn't get this right now,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're like, am I going to get points again? I'm like, points? Like, first of all, do you know who I am? Like, I don't really work like that, but yeah, they're very concerned about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I want to also mention about completion grades. It's a great way to start your semester, because remember how we were
Yes.
talking about all the weighting and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and we're saying like how the student's grade can drop from an A to a D really quickly.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, there's like no summative work, right?
Right.
All formative. And so students' grades, if they're not completing some of these formative things,
Mm-hmm.
they might be failing the class, but that's not accurate of actually how they're doing in class. And you really want
Right.
those grades to be more accurate depiction of
Yes.
what's actually happening, not just because they didn't turn in the assignment or whatever it is, but you saw them working on it. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good way to give some completion grades, so they're starting off kind of in a strong sense as opposed to in the deficit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, now, Jen, we've kind of teased this question a couple times, but we're going to dive in now. Hey, how do we know what is worth grading? Okay, how do we know what's worth assessing? And the big question, is it ever okay to not grade some work?
Yeah, so I guess the big important takeaway today is that everything you do is worth assessing, but not everything is worth grading.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Everybody who's only halfway paying attention to this, focus right now. Janet, can you please repeat that? This will be our big
Yes.
takeaway from today.
Listen.
Everyone listen.
All right. Everything is worth assessing, but not everything is worth grading.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. And can you explain just a little bit more?
Okay. So first of all, I probably have generally given my feelings about grading in general, right? And so I think, okay, so when we talk about everything is worth assessing, so if you are giving students work to do, the whole point is that work should be driving them towards the end goal. If it
Mm-hmm.
is not doing that, then why are you giving
Yes.
it in the first place?
Yeah. What is the
Right?
point of it?
What's the
Yep.
point? And then also the information. Okay, so again, assessment is feedback. So we didn't really talk too much about this, but what I mean by that is that whatever information that the students are providing to you, whether that is you're observing it, you're seeing it in a written form, you're seeing it in a practice or exploration form, you're seeing it in the final artwork, right? Whatever it looks like to you, you're taking in that information, and students and you should be doing something with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if I'm giving work to do, right? And I'm noticing that some students are struggling with that, right? Then my intention should not just to keep moving forward without
Right.
supporting those students, right? And on a side note, I guess that's where the differentiation piece comes from. You know how they talk about differentiation. I think that's really hard for us to wrap our heads around.
Yes.
Um, Really, I would like to say also that as art teachers, we go a step above differentiation and we individualize, right? Learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not actually addressing those students' needs, whether that's in an intervention form, whether that's general supports along the way, whether that's giving a challenge or an extension to a student who's, doing above and beyond, whether that's noticing your students are struggling, like 70% of them did not get this concept, then you either need to reteach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right then and there, or you have to say to yourself, wow, 70% of my kids didn't get this. I need to embed this skill again into the next unit, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't end there. It's not like a one and done, like I assessed this, I gave a grade, and I'm done.
Right.
All of that information, it should be informing your instruction,
Yep.
period. So that's what I mean by everything should be or is, right, worth assessing. And then not everything is worth grading. And I think we kind of talked a little bit about some of these reasons earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not everything needs to be graded because maybe you, okay, I'll give you a big picture example of something not worth grading. Okay. So let's say 70% of your students didn't get that technique or whatever it was. Should you be penalizing your students because you maybe didn't teach it well enough?
Right.
Right?
Right. That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but
It
it's
really
worth
is.
thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think if my students didn't get something, okay, and we all know we've been there where we're like, I swear I have drilled this into them. We've
Right.
talked about it a million times. They are just like, what's happening? There's some disconnect. I think about that as a job of mine, right? What am I doing? How can I deliver this differently? How is this? Yeah. How can I reteach this in a different way to get them to get it? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they should not be penalized in gradebook because they didn't get it, right?
Right. Right.
Something big picture was missing. Now, 10% of your kids missing something, okay, then we're talking about
That's a normal day in the art room.
exactly, maybe even 20%, right?
Yep.
It could even go up to a quarter or whatever it is, right? So that's an example of something I would adjust my rubric, adjust my grading, maybe decide not to grade something, maybe give them a completion grade instead, right? So everybody gets the points for trying, and I'm going to try it again, right?
Yes.
I
Exactly.
also say, so there's two more pieces of assessment that I think can be very confusing for new and veteran teachers alike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we talked about formative and summative, right?
Yes.
There's also, drum roll please.
I was gonna say, do we need to add more, Janet? Really?
There's also formal and informal, which
Mm-hmm.
either of those can also be formative or summative. So formal, I look at as like usually those typically graded pieces. So a
Yep.
summative rubric is a formal assessment, but
Yes.
so could also like a quiz that you're giving them, or
Mm-hmm.
a technique practice thing where you've taught them a bunch and now you're asking them to show you that real quick, right? That
Yes.
can be formal, right? Informal is usually that observation, the dialogue, the quick in the moment adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, summative can be informal, but it typically formative is the informal piece, right?
Yes. Yep.
So when I'm thinking about what to put into gradebook or what to grade, that informal stuff is typically not in there. Sometimes I might give like persistence, give them points for persistence or
Yes.
points for something just to show that they are still working on these things throughout,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty much that's kind of also delineates which one I'm putting into gradebook or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so can we talk a little bit more about those different types of assessment, I guess? Like, because I'm just thinking about, looking for some just simple strategies that teachers can use right away. Like if they're listening to this,
Mhm.
what can they take away and use right away? Like what does that type of assessment look like in the classroom? And like what I don't know. I'm just thinking about like different ideas that teachers can implement, maybe things that they have heard about but don't use, or things that may be new to them. Can you just give us a list of, I guess, ideas for assessment?
Yeah. So again, I like to be as creative as possible, right? And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
always, right? I might have given very stale bell ringers. I might have given exit tickets that were,
Yeah.
again, because these we sit in institute days, and this is what they talk about in our, all school discussions, right? They're like,
Mm-hmm.
implement this, implement that. And you're like, how do I translate that into my classroom? And also, you think to yourself, this is what the administration wants to see, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and that doesn't, it's just not authentic to what we do in the art room. Now, you can
Hmm.
absolutely use them. I still do it occasionally, integrate some of these things. I might do a quick quiz, for example, like a
Yeah.
5 point. I just want to make sure they understood the vocabulary or understood the
Hmm.
safety techniques or whatever it is. I might toss a 5 point quick quiz on my Google Classroom or whatever it is, right? So that's an example of that. Um, Sticky note feedback. Great. I love to use sticky notes. So I use sticky
I
notes.
also love sticky
Yeah.
notes. They are great. Well, and a lot of times I'll have because kids can get nervous about talking to each other about things. So I'll have
Mhm.
them write little mini critiques on sticky notes and then put them on the back of the work. And,
Yeah.
it's a good way for some peer feedback. But
Okay.
anyway, sorry to
Actually,
interrupt. But
let's talk about critiques for a moment, because I think that's a pretty common assessment that we use in our classroom, right? And so one thing with critiques, just remember that you don't want to wait until the end to critique.
yes.
First of all, I don't know about you, Tim, but like every time I did an end of project critique, kids
Hmm.
were like, it was like crickets, right?
Yes.
They're just all staring at it. Nobody wants to talk about their work. It's really
Hmm.
uncomfortable hearing someone share about your work in front of the whole class. And they're
Yeah.
always like, it's cool. I like it. You know?
Right, right. You have to use some serious strategies to get them
Right.
to actually talk. But I
You
don't
did.
know. I feel like end of project critiques, like they can have their place, especially with
Yes.
advanced kids.
Oh, for sure.
But I feel like for the most part, they're a missed opportunity because everybody just walks away going, "Oh, I should have done that," or "Oh, I should have tried this."
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like midpoint critiques, or just before you even start critiques. I don't know what the fancy name for that is,
Yeah.
but just, like if you're critiquing like ideas and beginning sketches and basic composition stuff, like those are both great because they can lead to improved work.
Yeah, so and that's a great way to use the sticky notes, right? So
Hmm.
students are even planning out their sketches. So before they even start their artwork, like you said, you can have them jot a little have a sticky note at their place with their sketches, jot out kind of, what they're thinking or a question they have about their planning, right? And students can walk around and jot onto the sticky note. It's a little bit more low risk. Like you said, you're not speaking out about it. Kids are giving feedback. Do that a couple rounds so you get a couple different voices in there, and that really helps, right? Or along the way, maybe you can do a more targeted question. You can say, we're looking at composition today, which composition is best, or what, I don't know, I'm kind of making this up on the fly, right? But
Yeah.
like, you could be like, did I refine my work enough, right? Are
Hmm.
the edges smooth on this pot, or whatever it is, right? You can ask them to write down a question about their work. And I think that's really powerful too, because again, this is my geeky assessment part, right? You can gather how students are responding to each other. You can gather what vocabulary students know and don't know. You can
Hmm.
gather how they're asking about their work. I mean, that's really important to know, if they can even articulate questions about their own work, like how are they
Yes.
thinking about their work, which we don't always see, right?
Hmm.
So all of that, and then you have to think, okay, how am I going to then teach my students how to talk about their artwork or
Right.
ask those questions?
Right.
So again, all of that feedback from a very low risk, aka sneaky assessment, right? Like, hey, we're doing this. Or sticky note quick draws. Like I said, students are showcasing something, that a skill that they have, that they came into the
Hmm.
classroom with. Are they imaginative? Are they able to shade on their own without you even prompting? Like, what levels are they at, right? And then dialogue, right? I think you and I were talking about this the other day, that you like to spend time talking to your students, right?
Yeah, just I love to do one-on-one critiques. Sometimes at the midpoint, sometimes at the end, but just being able to sit down because, like you said, like talking about your work in front of the class can be super scary sometimes.
Mhm.
But if you can just sit down at the table or have call a kid back to your desk, where you can just have a good conversation for a couple minutes, and just like you said, make their thinking visible, have them talk about what they're thinking, what they're doing, and just having that private one-on-one conversation. I think that can be incredibly valuable if you can make that work. Like, when I have 35, 36, 37 kids in my class, it's real tough to find that
Mhm.
one-on-one time. But It's still possible sometimes. Then when I have smaller classes, when my, advanced classes get a little bit smaller, it's something that, I like to do a lot. And I think it can be really valuable to just be able to have that discussion with kids at any point throughout the project.
Yeah. And I think even just bouncing around the room and asking students, where are you at? What are you thinking about?
Yeah.
And to be honest, when we talk about evaluations and that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
that's where that level of questioning comes in too, because you can dig a little deeper and
Yeah.
really kind of have those conversations. And yours, might take a little longer. You can do them in split seconds and get a lot of information from your kids.
Right. Right.
Um, I just want to touch on a couple more quick strategies for teachers.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think you'll
Please
want
do.
that. So practice is a great example of a quick assessment to give them too, right? So let's say I'm teaching shading one day. So I could start by saying, okay, here's a worksheet that we're all going to do, right? That shows how to
Hmm.
shade different things, right? But
Hmm.
it's all empty. We're going to do this as a class. I first want you to take this and explore on a separate piece of paper in your sketchbook what you think these things look like. That gathers information. Now you know what you need to teach or not teach. Some kids, they might even come with already shading experience. Great.
Right.
You don't have to spend a lot of time on that then, right? Then they can do it as a whole class, right? You can see how they follow those directions. You can help them in the moment adjust their shading techniques, right?
Yeah.
And then you can have them apply it in a low risk way to just kind of play with mark making, for example. So now they've shown you what they knew before, they've practiced it, they're exploring how to apply it in an actual way, and then you can take those pieces and say, okay, here's a lot of assessment that I just did. They are all meaningful and not just like busy work, right? Students
Right.
actually can make those connections, and I think that's really important. um, yeah. So another thing that I love to do too are goal sheets. So I set a lot of, I have an article on that one. I think it's called like time management, using the studio habits of mind for time management. These goal sheets are really great because it helps students make their thinking visible. They can write down their goal for the day. They can come up with questions that they need to start thinking about, whether that's for me or for them. They can then talk about successes that they had, right? Actually
Hmm.
celebrate at the end of class.
Yep.
And then at the end, what are some next steps for tomorrow? And it just really helps them also break down stuff. But you're gathering so much information from just these quick checks.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Can I share one more important story? I know. I was like, this is going to be short. We're going to get this done. But is it okay? Do we have time
No,
for
I, I love how he didn't even wait for me to answer if it's
I
okay.
know.
He's just like, is it okay if I do this? Go.
I'm going to do it.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay. All right. So one really important thing I wanted to share was about, remember how we talked about bell ringers or exit tickets, things that we expect our administration to do.
Hmm.
So I had created these bell ringers with a colleague of mine. We had this incredible curriculum. And so we made these bell ringer sheets that were for a week, right? So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
And we thought, okay, the kids will come in, we have a bell ringer on the board. They'll write the bell ringer on the sheet. They'll answer the question, right? Fold it up, put it in their sketchbook for tomorrow. They'll do the same thing over and over. At the end of the
Yeah.
week, then we'll take that and we'll assess it or
Yeah.
grade
This
it or
sounds like a great routine.
doesn't it? It is a total good procedure. It really
Yeah.
is. These are procedures and routines, right? Kids come in, they know what to do, etc.
Hmm.
Okay. So sometimes we would sprinkle in questions that were like very specific to what they were learning. And sometimes we would just sprinkle in some fun questions to get to know our students or get them thinking outside the box, right?
Yeah.
Again, great idea. At the end of the week, the students would turn that in. And then can you guess, Tim, what happened to those bell ringer sheets?
No, I would like you to tell me.
Okay, so this sounds familiar from earlier. So they kept stacking on my desk in
Yep.
piles and
Yep.
piles and piles.
Yep.
And then after about 4 weeks, they were such a big pile, I just kind of like threw them in the garbage or
Yep.
the recycling bin and gave the kids the points or took it off my grade book or whatever, right? And
Hmm.
never asked about them. They didn't care, whatever. So here's the thing I want to make sure that new teachers think about when they're creating their procedures for assessment, right? That bell ringer had the intention of supporting students' learning, right?
Hmm.
But it was not actually an assessment because nothing was timely feedback given back to them. Okay.
Right.
Whether it was a grade or my comments. The bell ringer was a great classroom management tool, right? So
Yes.
it was served that purpose. If
Hmm.
you want to do that, then maybe don't grade them or maybe give some completion points or whatever we talked about.
Right.
That can be a classroom management tool, but it is not an appropriate assessment unless you are giving timely feedback that is helping kids get to where they need to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that, yeah, something to keep in mind. You think of that as a classroom management tool because that is the reason you're doing it. If there's not an explicit like learning target there or some a reason for doing it other than this is how we need to start class, then yeah, it's probably not an assessment.
And it was like a perfect, great way to start the class, right?
Yeah.
Kids knew they can come in, they would settle
Hmm.
down, they would do what they needed to do. I could take attendance, right? It
Yeah.
was great, just not a great assessment.
Yep, exactly. No, that's a great point. Okay, so talked about lots and lots of formative stuff here. I would love to sort of get your perspective on summative assessments, rubrics specifically, because I'm just thinking back to when I was a new teacher and what my rubrics look like,
Mhm.
and they look suspiciously like the teacher who came before me, look like their rubrics.
Mhm.
Like looking back now, I was like, oh, everything's worth exactly 100 points, and
Mhm.
effort is a huge part of that. And, just like there are participation grades and just lots of stuff I didn't love. And I eventually got to the point where, I was much more intentional and much more specific about what was in my rubrics. And so I guess I just love your perspective with that too. Like when you're writing rubrics, when you're writing summative assessments, the formal ones, what do you value? And I guess part two, I don't know if you have a similar story, but like, has that changed as you've moved throughout your years as a teacher?
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on rubrics or summative assessments,
Okay,
because
see, Janet,
again,
this is where nerding
I
out
know.
over assessment maybe is a little too much. I don't know that we need an entire podcast on rubrics, but
I mean, I know, I get really excited. Okay. But listen, it's just that it's complex, right? It's not
yes.
super simple to just be like, this is what you do. Okay. So I also would come in and have the teacher prior because a lot of times, especially as a new teacher, you're not taking over a whole, you're usually teaching a couple different classes that other
Hmm.
teachers have already taught, right?
Yes.
So maybe you're the extra section of art one, maybe you're the extra section of photography, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
Now, if you're elementary, middle school, that may be very different, right? You were probably the only teacher, so this topic, I feel, of rubrics tends to gear more towards the upper levels, but can easily be modified for the elementary. And I think elementary, you've got like 1,000,004 students. And
Yeah.
what do rubrics look like? And how do I assess that? Right. Um, so I will say this. So I started off with all of those super long, detailed rubrics or checklists or points that were like this times two, this times four. And I was like,
Yes.
how does this math work? Like, I don't, again, you'd be surprised to know that I actually went to school originally to be a physics teacher. You,
Wow.
I know,
Okay.
can you believe
I
it?
I love that
Math,
I'm learning this right
oh
now.
my gosh, math though, it's like if you don't use it, it's just gone. It's just gone out of my brain. So I'm like, I need to compartmentalize the math side. So, so I guess it was not until after doing all of that deep work that I really realized what we needed to be assessing, right? And it wasn't just me. I mean, it started with me thinking about my classes, thinking about this, but it rolled into a whole department discussion about what's
Hmm.
happening with our students, right? And we realized so all of these rubrics were really focused on, like you said, probably technical, right?
Hmm.
Design, elements and principles, and effort or participation, right?
Yeah.
And so we realized that as we were working through that it was not valuing the creative process, which is what we as a department valued, that our students
Right.
understood the whole process and were digging into the whole process, not just looking for that graded outcome to check the boxes. We wanted to
Hmm.
see their thinking and to see them developing meaningful, expressive artwork, not just really great still life, right? That
Right.
we set up for them.
Yes.
So with that, the best way for me to kind of categorize all of these things was to create a rubric, and again, created a rubric for Art of Ed that is called the Plug and Play rubric, and it does
Mm-hmm.
exactly that. Since I've developed this for Art of Ed and for myself, right? I have not gone back since, and it has been the best grading tool that I could think of. It's been the easiest way for me to grade. Um,
Yes.
maybe because I created it. I know what I'm trying to do. But basically, I looked at four overarching concepts that never change in my rubric. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at technical, because we all are looking at
Yep.
technical, some
Yep.
technique that we've taught them. I'm looking at design, so composition, elements and principles, that kind of thing. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking now also at critical thinking. And this was a big piece because a lot of times too, rubrics will ask for creativity. And how do you define
Right. Right.
creativity, right? And so I decided, well, you know what? There are pieces that make us creative or make our work more creative. And that all comes into critical thinking, decisions and
Yeah.
problem solving and, meaning making and all of those areas. And then the last one I have is refinement. And that is kind of those critiquing, making sure we're using critiquing throughout. So students are asking for feedback, whether that's organically or formally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, how they're responding to their peers, but also what are they going to do with that feedback? Because again, we don't want our critique feedback to be one and done, right? We want
Right.
it to
Right.
actually them to say, "Oh, I'm taking in this information." Whether they choose to use that information, fine, right? But
Yes.
how are they using it? How are they making those intentional decisions? Um, so those are my overarching concepts. And then I
Mm-hmm.
have the next column is skills. And so skills are specific to each one of those. Now, here's the thing. I don't always grade or assess all of those concepts, right? Depending on my artwork, right?
Yeah.
So I might be just focusing on one technique and maybe I'm looking at technique and composition, right? I'm not looking for meaning making. I'm not looking for refinement. I'm just focused on those concepts. Then that is all I'm looking at to assess. Um, Another area that I'm looking at is maybe splitting in. So maybe I have two techniques that I want to look at, right, that are important and essential. And maybe I'm focused on this unit on refinement. Now, here's the thing is that we are teaching so much all the time. How do you boil that down to what it is that you're assessing in a rubric, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really easy to look at an artwork and say, oh my gosh, I've taught 20 different things, so I need to assess 20 different things.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and the focus should really be what is essential for that particular artwork for students to move forward. So let's say in the last unit I taught composition and most of them got it and I feel good
Mm-hmm.
about it. Maybe in this one, even though it talks about composition, right? Maybe I don't assess that in my rubric because
Yeah.
that's not as important at this time.
Yeah. It's not one of the essentials, like you said.
Yeah. So it's really about kind of looking and kind of boiling that down. Another way that I use these rubrics or think about, how your evaluators like, how are you writing the rubrics with your students, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that, right? Like, how
Of
are you
course.
writing it,
Of
right?
course.
And I often am like, I'm not, right? But here are the ways that they are learning how to work through that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
halfway through the unit, or as we're working on our artwork, let's say, so we've done a bunch of practice, we're working on our artwork. I can ask the students, okay, we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to talk about what are the criteria that we're looking for in this artwork.
Yeah.
And we talk about what are the objectives? What's the point of this artwork? Let's form those together. And I already have them formed in my mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this also tells me if they're getting where we're trying to go to,
Yeah.
right?
That's a good point.
So if they're like talking about composition, but we didn't even talk about composition in this unit, then maybe something's a little off, right?
Yeah.
Okay, something is disconnect. So having them kind of talk about criteria and then breaking that into must haves versus like bonus, right? Those additional things that are nice to haves, right? But the essential. having them work through that with you really makes sure that they know where they're going. And then, you can only need to assess those particular criteria. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yes, that
Wow.
makes a lot of sense. And I think for a lot of people, this may be tough to visualize since we're doing it podcast wise. So I'll just tell you, we will link to the plug and play rubric that Janet has designed, and you can kind of take a look at that. And I think once you see it on the page, it really makes a lot of sense. It's like a very intuitive rubric, I think. And so, yeah, just check it out if that's of interest to you, and I think you'll see the value in it when you check that out. Okay, so next question that I want to dive into, though, we've been kind of disparaging toward effort and participation on our rubrics. So, and I would guess, like you say, these are more classroom management pieces. These are more, behavior management pieces and just things you should be doing otherwise, not necessarily something that you should be assessing or grading. And I guess that's my simple explanation for why they don't belong on your rubric. But Janet, can you dive into that and give us your perspective too on why we don't want to put things like effort and participation in our rubrics?
Yeah. So again, this boils down for me about my equitable grading practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, you might have students who are in no control of their behaviors, right? That's just part of their makeup, right? And so why are you putting that in when they can't control that, for
Yep.
example? That's just
Yep.
one, that's like an extreme case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I always say, so I've had lot of really great discussions about this with really great friends of mine, because they're like, well, I think it's important to grade behaviors, that's really important to the art studio, right? Cleaning up and collaborating and all that stuff, right? So I look at it like this. You can assess behaviors, and
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, if you want to grade behaviors, you can maybe put those under studio habits of mind or something like that
Yeah.
in a separate rubric or separate grading category. But I do not put that into my rubric when I'm assessing an artwork, hands
Right.
down. Because first of all, how do you know what that looks like? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you could have a student who is, here's a great example. I have a student who's just kind of staring off into space in class. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, they're not participating. They're not giving their effort, who is it to say that they're not thinking about their artwork, and what does that
Right.
look like? Who's
Right.
to say they're not outside of class talking to somebody else about their artwork and thinking through their ideas that are not, not even visible to you, right? So I kind of look at it like that. Like, it's not, I want to keep their thinking as visible as I can so that I can use that as evidence towards their artwork. Not,
Mm-hmm.
it's not my job to dictate what their effort or participation really looks like, right? The other piece is that it's not in our standards at all, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that's a big piece. So that's why I say, if you're going to put that somewhere, at least make it separate and identify it as, these are maybe important pieces to my classroom workflow or whatever it is, right? And not in the artwork. So you could have a student do an amazing artwork, but maybe they're not the nicest kid or something, right?
Right. Right.
Maybe they're kind of giving you some slack. Maybe they've got their head down or whatever.
Maybe you just don't like them.
Right? Maybe they're just having a bad day, like, whatever. We're humans, right? Things
Yes.
happen. But their artwork is what you should be assessing. Their skills,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what we're looking at for the standards. I also think that this really leads to bias. So, like we said, that kid that maybe you just don't like,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it happens, right? That kid that maybe is just kind of a jerk. And so you're like, well, I'm not going to give them an A on this artwork. Well, that's bias, right?
Yeah.
They deserve the A. You got to keep
They deserve the
everything.
grade that they earned. Yeah.
Exactly. And so a lot of times people say, like, how can you grade artwork, right? It's so subjective. And I
Mm-hmm.
say, let's make it as least subjective as possible. Let's keep everything, all of our bias out, and
Yeah.
just focus on those essential criteria, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
On a side note, so remember how I did say that evidence of learning, I mentioned that.
yes.
So I just want to make a point too that I do have my students do like reflections or things like that, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't grade those because I look at it like I am not an English teacher, right? I'm not their
Mm-hmm.
ELA teacher. I am here to try to extract their thinking processes and use that so that I can be more accurately grading. And so when we talk about behaviors, is another thing. Unless I'm specifically teaching something, then I shouldn't be grading it, right?
Yep.
So unless I'm
Yep.
teaching them how to write an artist statement and it's like got a formula or whatever, then I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be putting a grade to it because I can't expect them to just know how to do that.
Yeah, and a little bit of a callback to what we talked about earlier. Artist statements are completion grade for me. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care how well you write. I don't care exactly what you're talking about. I just want to know your thinking, and as long
Yeah.
as you're sharing that with me, you get the points for doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, now Janet, I was ready to wrap it up, but we have a question that came in via email, and I figure we can end with this question. It's a good one. This is from Kellen in Virginia. And Kellen says, I'm enjoying all of these new teacher episodes and thank you for putting them together. Oh, you're welcome, Kellen.
So thank you.
Um, when you get to the one about grading, which would be where we are right now, can you talk about final exams? My district just told me that every subject area will need to have a final exam, and I don't know where to go with that. What do finals look like in an art class? What do you do for finals? Okay, would you like me to take this first, or do you want to take
Yes.
this
No, go
first?
for it.
Okay. When my district sprung something very similar to this on me, I was like, "Sweet, we'll put together our portfolios. We'll call it good." And my principal was like, "Nope, that's not going to work. They need to actively be doing something during that 90-minute time frame, or however long the final was." And so I had to shift my thinking a little bit, and I had them create an entire artwork from beginning to end in those 90 minutes. And so that's what I told them. You just have to create the artwork from start to finish in 90 minutes. But then we spent the days leading up to that final doing all of the preparations we needed. And so I would give them a theme and say, this is the theme that we're going to do. Do all of your brainstorming, all of your sketches, all of your ideas. We would give feedback. They would give feedback to each other. They'd plan everything out. They'd get all of the materials they want, have everything ready to go, and they literally come in for finals. I mean, they already had their paper cut for like what size they were creating. They would come in, get all their supplies, all of their materials, and just work for that entire 90 minutes. And then whatever they had completed at the end of that 90 minutes was the final. And so everything that kind of went into that process was part of the grade. And again, like the finished product was not always spectacular because you only have an hour and a half for an entire artwork. But again, the grading was all about the planning, the process, all of those things that we talked about before. But that kind of served its purpose for me. It was not an ideal experience for the kids, but I think it was an interesting one. It was a good challenge for them. And it sort of hit home on just kind of the art making process. And so I thought it was acceptable for finals
Mhm.
within the constraints that my admin gave to me. So I thought that was good enough. So Janet, what about you? What do you do for finals?
Yeah, so I used to do that too.
Okay.
And I actually stopped doing artwork as a final because even if I was like leading up to it, I usually was teaching a new technique or something like that. And I felt
Right.
like it wasn't really fair to make that cumulative.
Yeah.
But also, like, no offense, Tim, that feels really stressful to me, like 90
It,
minutes to, create an artwork, right?
Yeah, it was anxiety inducing for sure
Uh-huh.
for some kids. So yeah,
Yeah.
I regret that a little bit, but I didn't have anything better at the time.
I know, and things were different then,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Not quite how it is now, I feel like, but um, I also feel like they have so many other finals that these kids like super high risk finals that I just
Mhm.
feel like that pressure in general just created too much. And I was like, they're in art class and we should not, I don't want to put that pressure on them. Right.
Fair. Yeah.
So that's just me. I looked at my students. I'm like, they are so stressed. I don't want to add more to that. But I've also done things in the past where I've said, okay, we're going to work on for the last couple weeks, right? A self portrait that showcases 3 of the following techniques you learned from class. And I would give them like a list of all the different techniques. They had to choose
Mhm.
that. And that was really fun because they
Yeah,
actually got to be really expressive and then pick which ones that they wanted to showcase.
I like that.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll do like a fun, quick artwork, something fast paced, just kind of easy, like an artist trading cards. That's a fun one. So that they have some choice. They're still demonstrating some of their decision making and their skills, and they actually get to express themselves. You get to trade those. That's also fun. Um, or I've done like recently made them do portraits of themselves, and we made a book out of that. So it showed, their portraits from the beginning of the semester, end of the semester, and kind of shows that growth, which is kind of
Right.
fun.
Right.
But generally speaking, I actually now just create portfolios, and that's really what I focus on. And cleaning the art room, that's a big one. Cleaning becomes a
Yes.
grade then, I'll be honest, because it's part of our studio habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
But basically, my students are creating slides portfolios. You can do portfolios in a lot of different ways. You can toss them into a Google Doc and have them talk about their favorite or least favorite and why. You could have them talk about how they're demonstrating skills and show some vocabulary. For example, you could just do that, right? But I have them create slide deck all semester long. And then at the end, they review their slides and do like kind of a culmination reflection on the course, like, what
Okay.
would you vote off the island and why? Or,
Yeah.
how did you overcome some of your obstacles? And so for me, it really was more focused on how are they working through the semester and not just
Mm-hmm.
like an end result. And so that has worked really well for me too. And it takes pressures off of them. And I also say you're not going to get the last reflection. You have to sit there and write, or whatever, on the last day. But it's the same thing. It's like 90 minutes and maybe it takes them a half an hour tops,
Right.
and then we
Right.
clean. So yeah, that's usually what I do.
That works. And, I think just the big lesson is kind of within the constraints of your schedule and what your admin needs you to do and what you need to do to wrap up your class. And so I don't know that there's one overarching piece of advice or one way to do this, but hopefully the examples we gave may get people thinking about what's possible. Okay, but Kellen, thank you for the question. All right, Janet, it's time to go. But do you have any final thoughts? Anything that you want to share?
I guess that I just want to make sure people remember that assessment is not gross. Grading is gross, right? But assessment is really all the stuff we're doing all the time. And one of my big takeaways always for veteran teachers is reminding yourself of all the things that you're doing with assessment being feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that you can use that language and articulate that back to your administration too and say,
Yeah.
look at all the things that I am doing to assess. It may not look like math class, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I want you to know these are how I'm assessing my students all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well done. And I would say, just as we talk about with almost every one of these episodes, that's not something you're going to figure out right now. Okay,
Mhm.
something that you're going to work toward. And so I would say just teachers can and should reflect on what's important to them, what they want to value in their classroom, and then have the assessments kind of you know reflect that, whether you care about the process or the techniques or the composition or whatever, and just kind of have your assessments reflect that and push your students learning in those areas. And we talked a lot today about possible formative assessments that you can use, and so I hope people can find a couple that intrigue them or work for them. We talked a lot about rubrics and how we set that up, and so I hope that advice can be helpful for people as well. But yeah, just think about what you value, think about what is most important to you, and then kind of design your assessments around those areas. And I think that can be an incredibly valuable way to do things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
all right, we will close it up there. Janet, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for all of your nerdy excitement and your expertise. We appreciate all of it.
Thanks, Tim. I always appreciate chatting with you.
I want to say thank you to Janet for the conversation. I appreciate all of her expertise when it comes to assessment. As we talked about, she's written so many great articles and has so much more to say. And we'll put links in the show notes to as many of those articles as we can. And for all of the new teachers out there, when it comes to assessment, I would just encourage you to keep looking for new ideas, keep learning about the topic. As we talked about repeatedly in this episode and in other episodes, it will take a while to discover what is going to work for you, what is going to work for your classroom. But as Janet mentioned, when you do it right, it can be a valuable piece of your students' learning as well as your own teaching. Our next episode, episode 8, will be the final episode of the series on the topic of professional development. I hope you can join us again for that conversation, but until then, thank you for listening.